friends, today we're going to work on the Warm Hugs mitten shelf sitters. The first thing I want to talk with you about is how I marked them before I started. On both all three of them, I marked off the cuff of where I wanted it to be first, and I just went ahead and used my on the line templates for that because they're in a straight line. I also used just the edge of it as a straight edge to mark off the thumb. So there is a back stitch kind of seam between the thumb and the rest of the mitten. And then I am using my 1/2 inch marks here on my on the line templates, and I'm just going to put the lines at 1/2 inch. When it comes time for me to put the actual stitches in, I may or may not follow those lines exactly, but they give me a good placement guide for about how far the stitches should be apart, so I don't end up with the ones at the bottom really close and the ones at the top far apart, but they'll be approximately that size. If they're a little bit wider, I'll go a little above and below. For the coral pink mitten, I did the same thing. I marked off the part that I wanted to be the cuff. And then for this one, I took my 6-spoke radii template, marked the center first, and then I marked out each, I can't see because it's not close enough, but you can see that I put in, to get to the edge of the wool, I put 3 marks on each one. And then I rotated it so that I could have, like right now I've got 6 spokes, but I rotated it so that I would have 12 spokes, and I went ahead and marked it again. And that helped me keep everything lined up for the snowflake. At the top and bottom of this mitten, I wanted to have a stripe of herringbone stitches. And so the best way to keep those even is to make a frame that looks somewhat like a ladder. So I went ahead and used my on the line template and gave myself the 2 lines, the top and the bottom line of each of these herringbones, and it'll make more sense as you watch what I do. And then after I had marked them, then I turned it perpendicular and marked all the other little lines, and that gave me little squares or rectangles so that I would know what was going to happen with my herringbone. For my navy mitten, if you saw earlier that it was light blue, yeah, it looked better in navy. I went ahead and marked the cuff on this one. And then I need a circle on this one. And just because I was trying to be quick, I used one of my thread spools and traced the circle around there. And so in retrospect, I wish my circle was a smidgen smaller, but it worked out okay. So just trace something round, and you know the size of those thread spools, so about that. Okay, I have started on my white mitten, but I saved this part so that I could show you how it works. When I am doing the custom cording and couching it down, I want it to look like the stretchy part of the cuff of a mitten, and so I'm just folding it back and forth in place and then tacking it down. And I happen to be tacking it down with a light blue thread, so I am only tacking through the sections that are light blue, and sometimes I just go over a little section of it. I don't want to go over a big section of it because I don't want I don't want my tacking, my little couching stitches to show. So I just tack them down, and if I can't get them to stay close enough, I go back and tack it down again. I'm looking for them to try and be about as even as it can, so I keep going. Okay, let's talk about what to do when we have it all couched in place. I had plenty of my cording made just in case, then I would know how much to tell you to make. The short answer is you need 13 inches of this one, you need 12 inches of the other one. So I kept my other cording by putting a piece of tape on it and then cutting it in half. And then I'm going to unwind my cord back to, I might even trim it one more time. I'm going to unwind my cord back to the spot where I want to take my cord to the back. The reason I unwind it is that it's just too fat to go through all at once, to go through the wool to the back. Sometimes I would take like the whole blue to the back. In fact, that's what I did on this one. So after I've got it unwound, I thread that onto a large eye needle and just take it to the back. I did the peach one as two separate threads going to the back so that you could see how you can. Sometimes I've had to do as many as 4 threads. I would split the blue in half, split the orange in half, and take them to the back a piece at a time. And then you can tie them off there, but if I'm putting it in a quilt, I don't mind that because it will leave a big knot. But if I'm doing it on this, I just laid them flat and tack them down underneath the cuff part where I wouldn't be able to see it. So I just laid them down and added a few stitches to hold them in place. Okay, for the stitches that, the row that's right above that, it is a detached chain stitch with a little extra to it. And so the detached chain stitch, I want the point to be at the top. It's supposed to resemble a tulip, or at least that's what it does to me. So go ahead and do your detached chain stitch, but make your little tack down here at the bottom a little bit longer than you usually would. Not quite so close, because we're going to add some threads to it later. And then the other thing that I did on these was went ahead and did a bullion knot in the middle there to fill in that space. And then after you've done your bullion knot, you go back with, in this case, a light blue thread, and you're sewing what's technically a straight stitch because it just comes in and goes out, but in between you go through that little tack so that you end up with 2 little kind of U's underneath there. They look a little bit like leaves. Okay, I stitched the rest of the stitches according to the stitch guide, and if you need help with any of those, we have videos on our YouTube channel for all of those stitches. Okay, on to the corally pink mitten. I followed the marks that I had there, and with the white thread I just did 3. I did 3 detached chain stitches. I didn't connect these because I wanted them to be fully separate, and you'll kind of see why in just a minute. After I had all of those stacked 1, 2, 3 according to my markings, Then I went back and I added the little crossbars in between, and those I went through where I caught the stitches each time, just to kind of hold those in place if I could get through there. And that gave me those little marks that, to me, these little separate, completely separate chain stitches almost looked like little snowmen to me, and that's why I liked it that way. And then I filled in the center with 2 strands of the mohair yarn. To do that, very rarely do we fold it double and tie a knot, but that's what I did on this one in order to do the 2 strands. And I just did a detached chain stitch inside of each of the other detached chain stitches, and it gave it some fuzz to match the wrist, as well as filling in that space. Optional to go ahead and add French knots to your other 3 little dots. I did either 2-wrap French knots or 2-wrap colonial knots on it, and I felt like that gave it an extra sparkle of snow. Okay, let's talk about that herringbone stitch. A herringbone stitch starts at the beginning. You can see on the left, I start on the far side, and then each time I'm going to go past where my marks cross, and then back to before it, and then go down to the bottom and go past it and back before it, and past it and back before it, and past it and back before it. But when you're adding the second row, you need to, in order to make it look right, one of them needs to go over top of your blue in this case, and then the next one needs to go underneath, and that's why I tuck it under in between. So it's the exact same stitch, but I'm tucking it under and then over and then under, so that I get that the look like it was woven one color at a time. Or you can thread both needles, weave it one color at a time, but it will easily tie up your threads. Okay, sometimes when I start and stop these, after I'm done, then I'll go back and add a little stitch at the beginning or at the end where I go, okay, this one wasn't quite finished off. I want to add one that kind of goes off into no man's land because you're not sure where that next mark is. And finally, to tack these in place, and honestly, normally I wouldn't do this step because it's not necessary to tack them in place, but this dazzle is a little bit unruly, and because of that, it didn't line up correctly. I mean, it did line up correctly, but only if I bossed it around and told it where to stay. So I added a little stitch from the line and across the cross each time with white, and that just kind of helped them stay in their places. Okay, that is everything on our mitten. We do need to do a back stitch up the thumb seam, and we need to add the cuff. So let's add the cuff next. Okay, I did video the very beginning of this cuff so that you could see what happens. So you have to start somewhere, and I hate to have knots right close to the edge. And since it's going to be covered up, I came in about 1/4 of an inch from the edge, from the back to the front. And then I'm going to go back down and just come up by the edge. And that way my knot is nowhere near the corner there and going to be in the way. Okay, once I have it there, then I just go ahead with the end of my cord that doesn't have a knot, the end that takes care of itself, and I go up through with my couching thread, and then I do the same thing. I'm just going to fold it and couch it in place. I chose to couch it in place with mohair yarn because I had more left. Otherwise I would have used a white wool yarn, but there wasn't one handy. And just again boss it in place. If it starts to look a little like ribbon candy at Christmas, so there's a big opening on each end, just go back and tack it down to where you want it to be so that you have filled in all of the space. I took this one to the back the same way that I took the other one to the back. I unwound them and then just took them to the back. In this case, it ended on the edge of the wool. I prefer if it ends on the other edge because there's a little more space. But after I went through, I just laid those behind the rest of the cuff and whip stitched them in place. Okay. Let's move on to our navy one. The navy cuff on this one is not a custom cord because I wanted to expose you to other options for this. And so this one is chain stitches, columns of chain stitches that are right next to each other. Columns of chain stitches right next to each other tend to look like a cable knit look. And so you'll see as we do this, in that cuff, I could only fit 3 side by side, but I did the same thing where I came out in the middle and then go from there to the edge, and that way you don't have a big knot right by the edge of your project. And in this case, the French knots will cover it up. If I were stitching in something with higher contrast, I'd be a little more careful about where I put it, but I didn't have to worry about that here. I might start on the line because I know I'm going to have a stitch that goes back down across the top of that cuff. Then just 3 chain stitches, and then go back down to the bottom. You need to keep them all going the same direction for it to look right. So you always have to go back down to the bottom and do 3 chain stitches, and you try to keep them as lined up as you can. And then you'll see how, as you consistently do that, it'll end up looking like a knitted cuff. Follow the instructions to do the wreath on the navy mitten, but I have all of them done, and I have a couple of them pinned together here with their backing lining. That one doesn't have to be perfect, and then I just whip stitch them together. And so this is the video that shows that I hide my knot to begin with, and then I just want those little whip stitches all the way around to fasten them together. You could choose to just glue this one layer of wool to the wood. I think that second layer makes it so I don't have to worry about the glue being too thick or too sticky. I don't have to worry about it going through the wool because there's enough in that back to absorb it well and to stick well, and it just makes it easier, I think. Okay, here we are with everything done, and we are ready to glue them down. I prefer when I'm gluing to put some glue on and to use a little sponge brush to move it around, but I also like to put painter's tape so I don't get too close to the edge. And I didn't want to put the painter's tape all around all these curves, so I was just a little bit more careful using my tip of my glue to put it down. Plenty thick, not everywhere, but it should have a good layer on it. I just kind of went up the center of the thumb, and it's interesting that I did the coral one first as a try it out and make sure I got it right for you guys. When I did this one, I got a little too much glue in a couple places, and so after I pressed it down everywhere, then I clean up right there by the thumb. I've got a little bit of glue that's squeezed out, and almost where the top of your pinky would be has a little bit of glue squeezed out also. So just make sure if that happens that you clean it up, because if you're using wood glue, it doesn't dry clear and it'll leave a bit of a mess. And then when I am finished with them, I turn them upside down so that they are going to be pressed on really nicely. And then you can see that I put a half gallon of cleaning vinegar, because that was the heaviest thing handy, on top of it after I turn it upside down. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the navy one. Same thing, I was a little more careful this time with my glue that I didn't overdo it too much on the thumb. Those thumbs are pretty thin on the mittens in order to keep the perspective with the wool or with the wood, so the wood could be just a little bit bigger but not just be a blob. That's how it worked out. So again, put it down kind of close to the edges, and then you'll notice that each time I start with where the cuff is, and I put the cuff in place first, so I can kind of slide it in place, catch any loose things that you need to, and then stretch it into where it's supposed to be. I press it down a little bit till the tackiness stays, and then you can flip it upside down, put something heavy on it, and let it dry. Okay, that is how you make the Warm Hugs mitten shelf sitters. See you next time.